Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Field Trip Symposium. We are now moving into the second half of the online program, and we're starting off now with an incredible performance from the Bloom Collective. Bloom Collective are a collection of artists who have been working on a diversity of art science collaborations, and they have a major new work in the Sites of Connection exhibition, which we're featuring this afternoon in the program. And this performance that we're about to experience was recorded on the USC campus specifically for this event. So it's an exclusive performance. And as part of this, a cyanotype was created, which is now going to be acting as a sonic visual score for a performance that will close the symposium tonight. So this is The Wrong Kind of Beauty with the Bloom Collective.
branches that turn out to be root systems of trees long gone. Narrow, wasting, overpasses gathering banks of earth together while timelessly being pulled apart. Tiny highways for creatures to burrow down through and duck out of sight, away. I reach up my hands to shield my eyes from harsh glare of sunlight. There is little shade in these places, dried leaves, bleached, grey, twigs, scattered. A lower edge to walk up, to make it out of this hollowed out place leading nowhere on its surface, yet things are happening quietly, underneath. A land of forgottens and leftovers. Nothing is overly welcomed here, and yet I have made a little home for myself here today. A little sit spot, a few words on a page, the air is dry. I pick up a few of the pink and gold rocks as I'm leaving, feeling that a love of this place has grown itself inside of me, and I can no longer look at ridges and deep clefts and scrapes as scarred remains. Time and presence in this place has endowed in me new and intimate understandings of fullness and complexity, of what once was. By the time I'm leaving, sun's heat has lessened. There is nobody waving us goodbye, except the cool breeze rippling through leaves, fluttering in the warm light. The day has turned around. I look back to a golden rose, white, silvery gleam, pebbles, rocks, not knowing that new pathways are being forged and explored here. We are a long way from the ocean.
Thank you so much to Bloom Collective for that performance. Another incredible perspective for Field Trip that really puts listening at the centre. And if you're planning to attend the in-person program this afternoon, you can experience Bloom Collective's work in the Sites of Connection exhibition and hear a live performance to close the symposium tonight. And the cyanotype that was actually created live during that performance we just watched will be performed as a score tonight using the Decibel score player, which will be projected large scale onto the side of the theatre, which we're very excited about. So we are now going to move on to our second keynote of the day, which is the incredible Monica Gagliano. And Field Trip is not just about creative perspectives, but truly integrating the science into this conversation as well. So it's really critical for us as the Field Trip team to be guided by First Nation knowledge and really prioritize Indigenous artists in this program. And we're also really passionate about finding those intersections between art and science, and important for us to listen to different perspectives. And I really love that listening has become such an important topic of the symposium so far. And the Bloom Collective performance was very much an example of listening to place as well. So we're now going to look at that scientific perspective on listening. And I'm not sure if there is anyone who's really pioneered listening to the environment in the same way that Monica Gagliano has. Monica is a research associate professor in evolutionary ecology and former fellow of the Australian Research Council. She is currently based at Southern Cross University, where she directs the Biological Intelligence Lab funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation. And though her career began by studying animal behavior, she quickly turned her attention to plant behavior and cognition. And she has really pioneered a brand new field called plant bioacoustics, which shows that plants do make sound, that plants do listen, and has demonstrated that learning is not the exclusive providence of animals, but she's really reignited this discourse and groundbreaking research around, what it really means to listen to the environment and particularly listen and connect with plants in new ways. So we're very lucky to have Monica with us today to talk about some of her latest research on resonant earth. And we're going to start with a brief video and then over to Monica's presentation.
You sing your awe by the ocean shore and from under the waterfall. You sing your love for the deep river and its lessons in trust. You sing the magnificence of the big waters. But can you also feel the beauty of your own pulsing waterscape? The living waters that grow you, that move you. The million spirals unfolding the fabric of your being, up and through the spine, limbs, organs, bathing your brain, offering your grief in shimmering tears. Like the waters in the ground and the plants. They are quiet and vital. Sap like blood flowing up roots and stems, murmuring under the bark and from the thin lifelines of leaves. Carrying life, carrying feeling, stirring, washing, clearing. These waters know the tiny and great forms of flow within. Theirs is a song of origin. The womb of the world. In a cell.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Leah, for the incredible introduction. Thank you for having me and for being patient to start with a short video that I created. It's my first little film that I've created with the amazing Sarah Laborde, who is a poet, as you can see, but also an environmental engineer and an anthropologist and an eternal student of waters and its relationships. And Sarah and I started talking about water and what it means, like to talk about water. And because in a way we are both two scientists gone strange, we thought, how can we express this concept in a different way for us as scientists? And film seemed to be a good way to do that. And so we embarked into the national park in Granangari, where I am actually talking to you from. And this is Banjalan, the land of the Banjalan people. And we embarked in the national park and we got lost, just following the wrong path that, of course, led us exactly to the right place. And following the water. And so a lot of the shots that you see are from our little exploration, and all of the sounds that you hear are all from our recordings. So it started as an adventure, and I guess it just reminded me, at least, how science in itself should be starting as an adventure. And often I think that component is forgotten, and science in a way is reduced to something quite boring and quite clinically sanitized. But science can be, dirty and messy and get on the wrong path. And the only way in which we could find our way was by listening. And we were listening at the shape of the land, and listening to our own heart, and where our instinct said, "Oh, we should turn this way." And it was a beautiful adventure. And as part of the video, I also included, as you see halfway through, you are basically traveling up this huge jacaranda, and the sound that accompanies that is the sound of that tree. And this is a very special tree for me. It has become a very good friend in the last few months since I've moved on the land that I live on. And I actually sit on it. I climb it many days of the week, and I place the hydrophones at the bottom of the tree, and then I sit and I listen. And I've been listening, and of course the movement inside is again, there is a lot of water. And then it became clear that what we were listening in the national park, what I've been listening when I sit in the tree, what I listen when I need to find my way, is just this constant flow of all of the waters that keep moving us all as living entities and living bodies. And so, it became, the film became an attempt to trying to translate that or describe that feeling that the waters are the same waters is moving us all the time. And it's interesting to see the two scientists coming together trying to describe that, end up using poetry and imagery and sound. And the conclusion for me is like that these are the best means and vehicles to actually really approximate the best way possible the way in which this living business feels like. And at the end of the film, as you I don't know if you were able to recognize, but I recorded a coffee machine making coffee, because I realized that also that is also part of our nature, and coffee, of course, another plant, omnipresent for many of us. It also is also made with water, and it enters our body, and it springs our waters, at least our heart, to pump around this red sap of ours, the blood. And yeah, it was just, it became a very interesting game where the inside and the outside were blurred into one. And so he highlighted again how there is this permeability of living, and the relating is not something that we need to do, but actually it's just a part of our nature and everything that it's here. And so it was, it was a beautiful experiment, and I'm so grateful to Leah for inviting me when I said, "Oh, what do you want me to talk about?" And she said, "Oh, just your work." And I'm like, "Yeah, what kind of work? I'm bored of saying the same thing about my plants." And I said, "What about if we make something else?" And she's like, "Go for it." And so I'm very grateful for also that opening and that permeability again, to allow this flow of creative waters to move and to express itself in what you just saw, I guess. So yeah, I just wanted to intervene into this conversation by just sharing, an attempt of two scientists gone strange in describing something that science could describe very easily with just a couple of 2 letters and a number. But there is so much more to H2O. And one of the substances that I think we know the least and we understand the least. And in this process of engaging as we did, I can't speak for Sarah, but for myself, I felt, that I was really connecting to a living being, a person. So that's why the title became All of the Living Waters, addressing and honoring these other non-human persons that make us and move us. In the context of this, I also would like to acknowledge that, of course, many of these connections have been made before. So I would also like to share some of the work that Sarah did with a beautiful traditional custodian and elder of the Fitzroy River area up in the Kimberleys. And so Sarah, there is a little video where Sarah introduces a little bit the film, and then there is the short film. And I hope you enjoy, and thank you again for allowing me to play and to, permeate and transgress more boundaries as a scientist gone strange. Thank you.
Hi, it's Sarah here in Rome. I just want to say a few words about the film that you're about to watch. So it was made with Mervyn Street, who is a Gunyandi man and artist working in Fitzroy Crossing, Mankaja Arts. And it was made as part of a project looking at the connections between people and water along this river, including in Fitzroy. And yeah, we were not planning on making a film. We were recording some language with Mervyn's wife as well, who was since passed, and on Mervyn's country, Gunyandi country. And then had a conversation about water that turned into the sound of the film that you're about to see. And then we just kind of recorded some images and put it together, and it just flowed like that. So we hope you enjoy the film. Mervyn's decided to make it public, and he wants as many people as possible to watch it. So it's out on Vimeo, and it's you can share it if you like it, and yeah, enjoy.
Thank you so much, Monica. What an incredible contribution to the program. It's so great to have you as part of Field Trip, and so incredible to have those perspectives, which I think there's so many beautiful synchronicities there with all of the work that we've been talking about so far, and those intersections between Indigenous knowledge systems and art, science, technology, and culture. So thank you so much, Monica. We are going to move on to the next panel on the program now, and this panel will be chaired by Lisa Chandler, who's an educator, writer and curator, and she's also an adjunct associate professor in creative industries here at USC, and she was the foundation director of the USC Art Gallery and has curated numerous exhibitions, including Sites of Connection, which we will be featuring as part of the next panel. So I'm going to hand you over to Lisa now, who will introduce Sites of Connection and our panelists for the next session. Thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you all today from Kabi Kabi country, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also following the really beautiful words from Auntie Helena, stress and acknowledge the importance of First Nations cultural knowledge, although that's not the focus of our talk today. So I want to tell you a little bit about the exhibition Sites of Connection, which is, as Leah has mentioned, is on at the University of the Sunshine Coast Gallery at the moment. And it's about intersections between art and environmental science. And it's curated by Megan Williams and myself. And it includes work by artists who've engaged in sustained collaborations with scientists and researchers. And those artists include Leah, who you've heard from today, the Bloom Collective, and you saw their beautiful performance earlier that connects with the work in the gallery. And then three of the artists who will be speaking with shortly, that's Donna Davis, Alinta Krauth and Emma Lindsay. So the exhibition gives us a kind of a sense of what can emerge from art-science collaborations. And in this case, that's not work that literally illustrates environmental research. Instead, it's the exhibition presents work that connects us with why that research matters. So let me explain that a little bit further. We know that there are many profound problems facing the world today, and Megan's referred to that a bit also in relation to Final Call. And research is crucial in helping us to understand some of these major problems, such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, and environmental degradation. I also want to acknowledge, this I mentioned earlier, the importance of First Nations knowledge systems in helping us to holistically understand these issues. But as I said, we're focusing today on those kind of Western science focused research forms. So that form of research is often very complex, highly specialized, and sometimes it can be very hard to access it or to even connect with why it matters. But as we've seen today, and as we'll see through the artists in this exhibition, I'd really want to argue that artists can play a really valuable role in making such projects much more accessible. How can artists do that? Well, in many ways, and one of them is through that capacity to engage us on an affective or emotional level. Artists create works that are often have an ambiguous quality or are open-ended, and that can kind of open up a sort of a space of dialogue, can spark our imaginations or our curiosity. And all those elements can help connect us with why, what the issues that they're addressing matter. So in Sites of Connection, the artists have provided those imaginative entry points into some very pressing environmental topics such as carbon cycles and climate change, soil erosion, wildlife rehabilitation, biodiversity and species loss. And there are some recurring themes that have emerged through the exhibition, and one is very much about care, about the intrinsic interconnectedness of human and non-human species, and of course the value of different forms of knowledge. The the title, Sites of Connection, encompasses a range of different kinds of connection. Of course, one is connecting us, the audience, with those works and the deeper connections that they make. The artworks also connect us in visual and oral and tactile and immersive ways with the literal sites of research where the art science collaborations took place. And these include aviaries where flying foxes are undergoing rehabilitation for rewilding, a very scarred, eroded landscape near Toowoomba, a special wildlife reserve for the rare and endangered night parrot in the red deserts of Channel Country in far western Queensland, the tropical rainforests of North Queensland, and biosphere reserves around the world, including in the Amazon, Asia and Australia. Another of the sites of connection, of course, is the rich interactions between artists, scientists and the research that informs the work. And we've been hearing a lot about those kinds of connections, but initially some people might think that the worlds of art and science are very different because they use very different languages and approaches. But of course, there's much that's shared, and underpinning what both artists and scientists do is this kind of sense of deep observation and a curiosity about the world, a curiosity, a questioning, and a sense of wonder about the world and our human and non-human interactions within it. There are also processes that are shared, such as documenting, experimenting, reflecting, synthesizing, and evaluating. Now, the exhibition artists, of course, have much to share about the collaborations they engage in for this exhibition and more broadly. So I'd like to launch off our discussion now with Donna Davis, Alinda Kraut, and Emma Lindsay. And thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. So I'm going to just, Donna is magically here beside me, and Alinda and Emma are joining us on Zoom. So Donna, we'll start with you. And I'd like each of the artists to do this. Could you just briefly tell us about your work in Sites of Connection and the art science collaborations or interactions that informed them?
Yeah, sure. Thank you,
Lisa. Over to you.
Thank you. And I would also like to acknowledge the land on which we're coming today. We're coming from Gubbi Gubbi country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and past, present and emerging elders. So the work I've got in the exhibition is Decadence or Decadence, and it's a 3-channel video installation work. And it was created during a project that I was involved in called the Wood, Termite and Fungi Project. And it's looking at different players within the ecosystem that look at the decomposition cycle in the tropics. And I'm just going to read the actual science project. So the actual science project was to measure the relative roles of microbes and termites in decaying wood and the impact that it has on how carbon is released. So I was brought into the project pretty much at its inception as artist in residence on the team. It's a really big team with 14 different researchers across 6 universities, and that's in the USA, UK and Australia. For this work in the exhibition, I collaborated with 7 scientists across the globe via a series of virtual residencies. And those groups were the Zane Lab with Dr. Amy Zane, currently at the University of Miami, but was with the George Washington University, Rebecca Clement, an entomologist at George Washington University, the Allison Lab at University of California, Irvine, and that was with Professor Steve Allison, Vanessa Machucha, Elizabeth Dwan, and Nicole Hemming-Schroeder. And my last one was Associate Professor Jeff Powell from University of Western Sydney. And that was looking across different topics: ecology, entomology, mycology, conceptual maths, computer modelling and coding. So that's a pretty big introduction, but I'll go on for the next lot of people to talk about what they're talking about.
Thanks, Donna. And I guess from Donna's project, we get a real sense that it was a very huge multidisciplinary projects, but not all the projects are as expansive as that. So Emma, I'd like to welcome you to our conversation, and could you tell us a little bit about your work in the exhibition and the collaborations that underpinned it?
Sure. So again, I'd also like to pay my respects to the Gubbi Gubbi Nation for hosting this event on their land, unceded. So the treatise on the night parrot installation was made specifically for Sites of Connection, but it's based on research I've made on the critically endangered night parrot since 2007. And my collaboration with Nick Lesserberg, the UQ PhD candidate and ecologist on night parrots, began in 2019. So I've been doing research with the Queensland Museum night parrot specimens since 2007 and gone out on field trips to see the bird's habitat in Diamantina back in 2008. And then this year at the Pullen Pullen Reserve that Bush Heritage Australia manages last minute, which was fantastic. The first work, Pullen Pullen Tableau, Proposal for a Night Parrot, offers an experience of fieldwork encounters in the museum and at bird habitats in Western Queensland. So the ceramic bird form centrepiece sits at eye or flight level within a fragmented landscape of ironstone plains and spinifex. And down below near ground level, you'll see a proposed dinner table offering 4 types of seeds known as parrot food, including the great giant grey spinifex and Mitchell grass. They sit atop little mini ceramic tabletop mesas and spinifex mound plates to reflect familiar formations that you would see out in the bird's natural habitat area. The accompanying sound workstation for Tableau offers 2 sets of collaborative sound recordings. The first is a series of various live night parrot calls collected on site by Nick Lesserberg. And the second offers USC audiences the chance to hear an original composition by Jessica Wells called The Night Parrot, which was commissioned originally by Bush Heritage Australia for the Queensland Music Festival in 2019, and which Jess has kindly given us permission to broadcast for this exhibition. The final part of the installation, Panorama, incorporates scientific photographic data relating to birds that was collected by me and scientists Nick Lesserberg, Steve Murphy, Stephen Kearney, Alexander Watson and James Watson. Now the paintings of the specimens that I saw at the museum, which are the Boulia specimen from 1990, the Diamantina one from 2006, and the near Pullen Pullen bird from 2019 are positioned as additional data in this photographic grid of information, reflecting upon how that live bird field research of these scientists working with the live ones intersects with this museum work done by people like Heather Janetsky at the Queensland Museum. And it's aiming to raise some of this critical scientific data in a visual form for the public and raising necessary questions about human activities in wild environments that both harm and help disappearing native species at this time of the Anthropocene, climate change and extinction.
Thanks so much, Emma. And again, I guess we have a sense
no worries.
Very multi-layered elements in your project. Alinta, I'd like to welcome you to the conversation, and could you give us a sense of your very complex project and some of the interactions and collaborations that underpinned it?
Hi, yeah, I'll try and do that as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional elders and owners, past, present and emerging. So I took a slightly different route with my work in that I embedded myself as a volunteer conservationist in an organization and actively became a member of that organization, not just an observer of them. And that organization was Bats Queensland. So I was interested in the concept of care and how care functions in the fieldwork of scientists who care for what they study, but perhaps have to show this in a rather objective way. So I began through this rather sort of science technology studies approach to questioning, which eventually led me down the path of working with these flying foxes and working with their rehabilitation, and specifically working on a project where I designed and implemented interactive flying fox enrichment toys for the bats in care, which I sort of see as sculptural artworks, but I imagine they kind of see them as things to play with. And part of this concept was that these were sculptures and other more digital artworks where where both humans and bats could play together in a sense without actually being near each other, because of course it's very ill-advised for members of the public to interact with bats. So I ended up playing in this space where I was thinking about how my creative practice could have an aesthetic that sat on the borderline between what humans see as art and perhaps what bats might see as art. So when it comes to the term collaboration in my work, I feel in the end that actually the lives that I was collaborating with most were the bats rather than the other people involved, and they became the inspiration, and they gave me the feedback on my work and so on. So that's essentially what you see in the gallery, is a lot of documentation of that process, documentation of the bats themselves, and really trying to de-center the human experience of art and interactive art, and thinking more about how can we think of more than human and non-human experiences of the world, not humans trying to become other animals, but just trying to think of how do our practices, how can our practices be useful and functional and inform this kind of more than human point of view.
Thanks so much, Alinta. And yeah, it's amazing. Your work really is a kind of collaboration with the Flying Foxes, and those ideas of decentering human perspectives emerge so much in your work, but I think very much in the other works as well. And that idea of care, as I mentioned before, is I guess that's what's something that's very interesting when you put disparate works together, and the sum of the parts, you know, brings out something more, such as these ideas that come through.
Yeah,
thank you. I guess there might be people listening in who are kind of thinking, well, how on earth did all these artists just initiate these art science collaborations? Did they just happen? So I'd like to ask each of you, or Alinta, yours is slightly different, but it's the same sort of thing applies. So I'll start with Donna again. Can you tell us how and why your collaboration was initiated, and whether you'd been involved in any, you know, prior collaborations of this nature?
Yeah, well, great question, because it's a question often asked. I was actually through a previous art science collaboration that this collaboration came about. So I had been working on a project that was looking at symbiotic relationships between trees and fungi. And I had been working for about 18 months with my mycologist from the Queensland Herbarium. And I had created a body of work that was touring Queensland. It was on exhibition up in Cairns at Tanks Art Space. And while I was giving a talk, actually with one of my collaborators from the other project, Dr. Sapphire McMullen Fisher, we were giving an art science talk in the gallery space, and I had a group of people sort of just listening to the talk, and then this new new lady came into the space and was sort of hovering around but didn't join the group. So of course I invited her over to join the group, and she listened to the rest of the talk. After the talk, she came up to me and she introduced herself as Dr. Amy Zane from George Washington University at that time. And she was just embarking on this new project that was looking at different players in the decomposition cycle in the wet tropics. And she enjoyed the way that I had interpreted or visually created these works to interpret this other research project, and really thought that this could be something valuable in her team. And she was really wanting to highlight the players in the decomposition cycle. And of course, when we were chatting about that, I of course went, well, of course, you know, we're players, the humans are players within that decomposition cycle. So I could immediately see some, you know, some ideas to look at termites, wood, fungi, and the human to create these artworks where we as humans could see ourselves in those works. And yeah, so it was great. Through another project, organically, another project had come about from that one.
And that's fantastic that that happened from, you know, from both sides, from both artist and scientist perspective. Emma, you've mentioned how your project is kind of really, that there's quite some time that you've sort of spent on the ideas and the research within your project. How did the collaboration come about, and was this the first time that or had you done prior art science collaborations?
Sure. Well, most of the art science collaborations I've done have been self-initiated and began with me reaching out to Heather Janetsky in 2007 when I heard about this first night parrot that had been found after years in the wilderness and thought to be extinct. So I've been working with their collection to make art paintings on the night parrot, but also other endangered and extinct species in their collection for about the last 14 years. And things have kind of organically grown out of that. So the randomness of the work for this was sparked, particularly the collaboration was sparked in 2019 when I won tickets from Bush Heritage Australia to go to the Brisbane debut of The Night Parrot by Jessica Wells. And at the pre-drinks event, I got introduced to Nicholas Lesserberg, who was the, ecologist for the Pullen Pullen Reserve. And we kept in contact over time on his night parrot research because I'm obsessed with this bird. And when asked whether he wanted to collaborate on an art exhibition, he jumped at the chance. So my professional practice is really built on these collaborations and networks similar to Donna, and from the night parrot, I went into a PhD project called the Extinction Project from 2012 to 2016, which required field trips to many global natural history museums in Australia, France, England, and the US to measure and photograph 29 extinct bird specimens that I'd found, which included a few contentious additions a lot of scientists will argue with me about. But I had to be able to connect and get permission from multiple museum curators to do that project, and had any of them said no, it would have sunk the whole thing. So when the 29 paintings were done, they were installed as part of the World Science Festival Brisbane, which was also a result of my relationship with the Queensland Museum. And that flock is now held at the UQ Art Museum, which has a research collection which both scientists and public access, and is the first time these bird specimens painted as life-size proxies could be seen together in one location in an actual Australian museum. So I've found collaboration is a real necessity on so many levels when working in this field. In 2017, I had another opportunity for this kind of thing with Artspace Mackay when the then director Julie Skate invited me to make a solo show about the local environment from the rainforest to the reef, which led to 9 months of field research, culminating in my Great Barrier Reef Anthropocene project. So I participated in Bird Week in Yungala, saw the endangered Yungala honeyeater. I connected with scientists at institutions like the Australian Institute of Marine Science, scientists that were randomly working at Lady Elliot Island, UQ Heron Island, and Lizard Island research stations. And some of these meetings were arranged, but sometimes they were random chance encounters, just like the species I was seeing. And other scientific collaborations have come from chance meetings. So, for example, working with Penny Olsen on her night parrot book after meeting her at the National Library of Australia when I was researching my PhD, and an artist residency in Ajo, Arizona in 2008 gave me the opportunity to volunteer at the Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge, where I saw the endangered Sonoran pronghorn. So these things are really organic, and I think once you commit to them, like Donna, it becomes a life mission that you want to continue in your practice.
I'm certainly getting a theme here of a kind of the time and the energy and the passion, but also the occasional serendipity that
oh yeah
emerges. Now, Alinta, as I've obviously come to understand, a person just can't walk in and start researching flying foxes. Can you tell us a bit about your long-term kind of time and effort that you've put in your collaborations?
Yeah, so a bit like Emma, I approached this organisation, Bats Queensland, directly, and I asked them if I could essentially do this project with them. And because I wanted to, I'm an artist, of course, so I want to get involved and I want to experience it. I don't just want to observe what everyone else is doing. And of course, to do that with flying foxes, that is in itself a long-term thing. So I went through an interesting process at the beginning of this project where I had to undergo a lot of training I essentially, you know, I had to get certificates. I had to undergo a lot of biosecurity approvals that I had to write up myself, that were about 20,000 words in length for a biosecurity approval situation. I had to get lots of vaccinations and lots of blood tests, and basically undergo this big sort of medical situation. And of course, to do everything the right way, I'm sort of head to toe in all this PPE when I go in there. And so there's you know, there was a very big process to go through that included a lot of different stages, not just because of the way that, you know, humans have these leaky bodies, and so we had to get all these vaccinations, but also just the process of learning to do what these conservationists do, learning that process of rehabilitation and care, and almost like nursing, learning that process of rescue, you know, going out and unpicking little wings from barbed wire and this sort of thing, and learning about, of course, the extreme emotional toll that can have on people who do that sort of thing. So I felt like, specific really to this project, and I really haven't done this in other sort of SciArts collaborations that I've done before, really specific to this project, it was really involved in terms of feeling like a process of becoming, you know, becoming one of the conservationists and doing that work. So yeah, so it was interesting in that way. And I imagine, so anyone can do it, but it's just a very long and involved process.
I think what's really emerging as we have this conversation is that it's not a sense that any of the artists have just waltzed in, and that there is this kind of very deep engagement that's underpinning the work, and a kind of a dedication, a hard work to make those connections and to make them work. In my introduction, I was talking a little bit about the that kind of different languages, perhaps different approaches, and also similarities between how artists and scientists might work. So I wanted to ask each of you, and I'll start again with Donna, just through your experiences. So, you know, what did you learn about some of the similarities and differences in the ways that artists and scientists undertake research? And Alinta, you may, of course, answer that in a different way, but we'll come to you. I'll just start with Donna first.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, there's, I suppose, the thing that artists and science both have, you know, in bucket loads is curiosity, wonder, passion, that dedication, like Alinta was saying, you know, that, you know, jumping through hoops, signing off all the boxes, learning, you know, and, you know, I think that's something that ties us together, is that we both actually share a common goal. And same with, like what Emma was saying, you know, that passion about the birds, and you're fixated on the night parrot. You know, that's what we're like, and you have those discussions. And I think through those discussions and that shared passion, you know, there's that process of inquisition where we're both really asking key questions. So the scientists are asking key questions about the science, and the artist often, well, from my perspective, I'm asking key questions about, where do I sit as a human? Where do I sit within that research, and what part am I playing? And particularly with this work, because it is, you know, really talking about the players in the ecosystem. And I think quite often the human is overlooked as one of the players. So, you know, that asking questions, and I love asking questions and I love learning. So that just works out really, really well. But in terms of, I suppose, the logistics of that sort of art science, you've really got that experimentation process where you've got, you know, that starting with the asking questions, coming up as an artist, coming up with a concept or an idea, and the scientist is coming up with a theory. You know, as artists, we're prototyping and testing, and the scientists are doing the same thing. They're coming up with ideas for their experiments in the labs and then testing them. And then, you know, we're both evaluating, we're both reflecting, we're both refining. You know, so I think there's just a whole heap of shared, your processes there. And I suppose the other then when you look at the outcome of what we're doing, all of this research and learning and creating, and then what's the outcome? Well, for the artist, you know, it's often an exhibition, and for the scientist, you know, it's perhaps a publication, and they're both, you know, like the scientists are then going through those, you know, journal process where they're peer reviewed. Well, the artists are also peer reviewed, you know. So I think it's really interesting, and through the series of residencies that I did with my collaborators, this sort of commonality was often discussed. And when we would come to the end of a particular period of time working with each scientist, I would ask them to, you know, sort of just do a bit of feedback with me to find out what were the benefits to them. And there was this real shared, oh, I didn't realise that we were so similar. Watching how much research you're doing as an artist, I think that sometimes isn't seen, because as artists we do work so quietly in our studios often, and you don't see us until we present a body of work. But the scientists working through that collaborative process was actually seeing the amount of research that was going behind the artworks and the depth that we were putting into it. So.
Fabulous. And I think when we, you know, from both sides, or how we want to think of it, you know, when we understand those kind of different approaches or what we might have in common, that helps to sort of further develop understandings. Emma, can you tell us about some of the similarities and differences in approaches that you found through your project between working with perhaps with Nick or with the museum?
Well, a lot of my answers are probably really aligned to Donna, and she's answered that really well. So, but I guess in my experience, I see a lot of similarities between us. Like as Donna said, we work from a deep passion for the natural environment, but we also rely on grants to supplement our research. We can make or break our ability to create work. We travel to collect data in the field to make our work, often on our own dime. We're often using exhibitions in museums to present simulated sensory environments to the public based upon our research. And I've also found a lot of animal scientists tend to make art for themselves of their work, which they don't often show, whether by taking photographs or making paintings or other art media that might be at hand. But the most obvious difference for me as a painter is that I often research and work alone for months in a studio, collaborating at a distance or for hours or a day with some scientists on site. But most scientists would work in teams, even when they're researching in the field or doing their published research. And it can be harder as an artist to be considered a researcher in the scientific realm when engaging with scientific institutions, as we're often considered commercial producers rather than academic visual researchers. And this was an issue that actually almost sank my PhD when I was trying to access the Tringet Natural History Museum in Hertfordshire. They were going to decline it because I was an artist PhD student, not a scientist. And thankfully, a connection I'd made in 2008 at the World's Museum Liverpool with Clem Fisher, the curator there. I'd worked with her while researching the first ever collected night parrot on the Sturt expedition in 1845. She vouched for me with that curator, and that allowed me to proceed. Also, in terms of the subject of extinction, a subject is really bound to the strict meaning of the term, and a species has to be completely removed from the earth for them to classify it as extinct at all. As an artist, I can interpret and play with endangered extinction that provokes debate. So, for example, including a local biogeographic extinction of a bird on an island in my paintings, which can't be replenished by a tiny, perhaps remaining mainland population, which a scientist would never do. Or I can paint a species that a scientist has told me they believe has already become extinct, but is yet to be confirmed by a peer-reviewed source. So endangered species are often on the path to full extinction, and my work wants to raise awareness of these issues so we have a chance of avoiding it if that's possible, which is a goal I think a lot of artists and scientists share.
Thanks, Emma. And you've highlighted again some of those complexities really, really effectively through examples. Now, Linda, your work's kind of different, and you spoke about really how you were working with the flying foxes and were kind of thinking about a kind of an aesthetic and an interaction that might work for kind of people, humans, might work for the flying foxes. So again, I'll leave it to you to how you might want to answer this question, whether it's similarities and difference between how the conservation people worked or how you kind of thought through your project with the flying foxes and yourself.
Yeah, I thought I'd answer this perhaps a bit more broadly about a lot of different SciArt collaborations that I've done over time, because, you know, you can see things emerging across them all. And definitely, I mean, I echo Donna and Emma absolutely, in that I think us as scientists and our sort of us as artists and our environmental scientist counterparts are interested in asking similar questions about the world, but we're just using sort of different methodologies to get there. You know, one is creative practice and the other might be more quantitative. And I think sometimes the world forgets that art can be research in its own way, and that we're not just the communicators of science, and that we have our own agendas within these collaborations, as Emma was saying. And I had an interesting chat one time with, I was a chemistry scientist actually, who said that one of the things that frustrated them about their research was how they were doing these tests and they were looking for a particular thing, and all the tests that failed to find that particular thing got thrown out. But they were saying there could be really valuable things and useful findings in that stuff. But of course, nobody's looking through it. No one will ever know because it doesn't answer that particular research question. And I think that's an interesting way to think about how arts methodology can apply to scientific work, in that we tend to bricolage and we're sort of the bin sifters, and we can go through and we can find that sort of that extra padding that might have otherwise be thrown out, and we can actually find something and do something with that. And I wanted to just quickly bring up a point that Emma was mentioning about how she almost didn't get her project approved because it wasn't seen as science. With my work with the flying foxes, as part of this, I made sure I went through an animal ethics approval process. And interestingly, for me, it was almost the opposite, in that they said to me, well, how are you using the animals in your science? And I said, well, I'm not. I'm making art. And they said, oh, well, then this doesn't apply, you know. And so it was kind of like, so what? So I'm somehow outside of an animal ethics approval. This doesn't make sense. I should be held accountable as well. So it's quite interesting how we're sort of seen as different when we're doing the same things, basically.
I think you made some great points. I think we'll all remember that term, bin sifters, but that notion of really looking from different perspectives, of not kind of going along that very focused sort of line, which scientific researchers inherently often have to do. There are things that can emerge, and then those challenges of when you intersect and the research that does inform creative practice, having that kind of recognised in interdisciplinary fields. I'm mindful of time, and that we want to leave. There's a question I want to ask you that's come up that I want to ask you at the end, but I'd like to ask each of you if anything surprising or unexpected or particularly interesting emerged from the collaboration. So I'm going to start with you, Donna.
It's a tricky question.
I know, throw in something a bit, but unexpected. Interesting.
Fun. I think that one of the things that surprised me a lot, and reflecting something that Emma said of that artist working alone, and that we do spend a lot of time working alone in the studio on these passions, and we come up with these ideas, and being forced to, I spent a fair bit of time at the beginning before COVID hit, because this was a project that started back in 2019, which was nice. I did get to go out into the field and on lab trips into the lab with the scientists. And when you're doing that and you're spending that really dedicated block of time, say 1 or 2 weeks, you're not only spending that time with the scientists in the lab and the field, but you're also spending those after hours times. And especially out in the field, when you're sitting around the campfire of a nighttime, all of a sudden we're sort of talking about the science, but we're also talking about our personal connections and our personal relationships and why we do what we do and where we expect to take that and how we see that helping. And, you know, for me, it was all about the idea of climate change and how can we raise awareness that there are a whole heap of processes that are happening. And it was interesting to talk to the scientists on those levels as well and peel back the science, that peel back that and just get down to who they are. And from that, and then through the virtual residencies afterwards, the surprising thing I think is friendship. Like we've still got this, I quite often get little emails from different team members, for example, oh, Donna, you know, have you read this book? This book is amazing. Like, I think you'd really love it. And then another one might go, I just read that book and I wrote this poem. I thought you'd be really keen to read it, Donna. And so I've got the scientists also having their take on creative enterprise and they're sharing it with me. And that's really lovely, that this real shared value and shared respect of what we're both doing, I suppose, is always the aim for me for these art science collaborations, to have that absolutely equal value. So that friendship would be the absolute standout for me. But also, I was pretty stoked too. One of the professors over at University of California, Irvine, was doing a TED talk, and he actually asked if he could use one of my animations as part of the TED talk. And I went back to have a look at that talk he did, which was only a lovely little 15-minute talk about how microbes can save the world. And when I love that. And when I looked at the views, there was over 28,000 views of that TED talk, which gives me real hope and excitement that people are interested in what they can do about climate change and about what the natural ecosystems are already doing to save the planet. When we remove the humans, you know, ecosystems already doing their thing.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you, Dawn. Again, I'll probably have to ask you to be fairly brief. I'm not sure if we've got an extra 5 minutes, so I know we want to try and keep on time, but I'd love to hear from both Emma and Alinta. Emma, was there something surprising or unexpected or interesting that emerged for you from your project?
Sure. Well, the first one was that by meeting Nick randomly, he introduced me to Jessica Wells, the composer. So, and her willingness to participate in this as an artist in someone else's work was really generous and unexpected. The title of the installation refers to both my 2 collaborators in that sense, but also it has an art twist. I'm obsessed with the paintings of Cy Twombly, especially a 10-metre work called The Veil, Treatise on the Veil from 1970, and it was inspired by a musical score by Pierre Henry called The Veil of Orpheus, who was a pioneer of musique concrète, a music that manipulated non-instrumental sounds on magnetic tape, and it evokes that classical myth of Orpheus going to the underworld to rescue his wife Eurydice. So in Australian history, this night parrot story has quite a mythological status as well. You've got it in poetry by Dorothy Porter and Robert Adamson, Brett Dionysus, the works of John Gould, Pina William Cooper, the Night Parrot Stories film by Robert Nugent. And Nick and I compiled our own version of night parrot non-instrumental sounds for this show, allowing the listener to listen to all the weird calls, including plastic singing by a juvenile learning to be a night parrot, the echo of a human-fired gunshot taking care of a cat that had been stalking them in the Spinifex. And so you can then go from the sound installation to the spectrograms from Nick's computer, which allow you to see a visual mark of those calls and register it as an artwork. Like, they're very colourful. And the myth of Orpheus too seems apt in that sense of the night parrot being a ghost bird being brought back from the dead. But the most unexpected outcome was getting to go to Pullen and doing something I never imagined I'd do from the start of all of this, and that was to actually hear and see a night parrot. Yeah.
Wow, that's actually, and having kind of spoke to you through the development of this work, and when Megan and I visited your studio and you were so excited, and then we became quite excited at hearing those night parrot sounds, and it was, I'm so glad that you've been able to then take that further and go out to Pullen. What an amazing experience.
Oh, brilliant.
Alinta, can you tell us, what was something that was surprising or interesting or unexpected that emerged from your project?
Oh, look, I mean, I think that everything was surprising in one way, but I think like with Emma's work, because my work involved non-human species, I sort of had this sense that I knew that there would be surprises or things that I didn't expect to occur, but I didn't know what those things were going to be. And I think that just the main surprise for me was in having the fruit bats interact with my work, just the amount of agency that they have, and just giving up and giving over my sense of deciding what is or isn't going to happen, and completely putting it in their hands and saying, you know, you can like my work, you can not like it, you can destroy it, you can completely ignore it. It's completely up to you guys. And so I think just recognizing and their individuality as well, you know, if you have a group of 50 to 100 bats, some of them are, you know, really, you know, stroppy, and they'll come up and they'll be like, what's all this then? And, you know, or they'll come up and they're trying to grab stuff off me before I've even, you know, put it up. Or other times they just, you know, get completely ignored for about 5 hours, and I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, maybe this was not working out. So yeah, I think just working with them as individuals and seeing their agency was just really nice.
We're running it. Thanks so much, Alinta. I'm just going to, there's a couple of questions, but I will have to sort of combine them. So I'm just going to ask you to answer quite briefly. But this really refers to what they're referring to, that broader education or debate that will now emerge from the works that you've done. So there's a question about what potential is there for aspects of these projects to be applied in educational settings, or there's another related question about ethical debates about extinctions, but you can answer that however you like, about how this might be disseminated further to have an educational or a dialogue function.
Yeah, well, I suppose that, you know, if works were you know, with exhibitions, there can be education kits that can accompany those works. And I'm also a great believer that, you know, the more you can share and the more you can talk about the work that you're doing, the passion about your work, the better. So, you know, engaging someone to write an education kit, or inviting schools or letting schools know what you're doing, or, you know, having artists in residence in the schools to talk about these projects. Yeah, I probably haven't got a great answer.
No, that's fine. And you can just be brief. Emma, can you add to that in any way about how you see the importance of outreach? Yeah.
I think interactive projects are really key to this kind of thing. Like, one of the reasons I don't stay in my lane as a painter and just put paintings on the wall is because I want people to engage with an environment that I've created that's fragmented and shows that human trace Donna was talking about before. But the problem is that didactics don't go far enough. And as Donna said, you know, having talks, being present and being able to explain all the small details that the artist knows really well, and being able to make the connections for a viewer. The World Science Festival work, for example, it was so busy with people that they couldn't see the sign saying what the works about the birds were about. And so me standing there, they'd go, oh, wow, nice painting. And I'd go, it's an extinct bird. And they'd go, really? And they're Australian. I'd say, well, I didn't even know they existed. And then they'd be horrified because one minute they've just learned about this bird they'd never heard of before, and then they find out there's no more of them ever left. And it makes them think about it and go back and do more research. And I think things like this, blogs, websites, interactive installation and work like Alinta's and Donna's, and video work, as well as these kind of two-dimensional things that allow you to have space to look at things in depth quietly, are really important. And then obviously communicating that, getting it out there to new audiences, that's super important.
Of course. And Alinta, just do you want to briefly add anything to what Donna and Emma have said?
Yeah, sure. I think, I mean, in terms of primary school and high school settings, I think just in general, introducing more sort of arts methodologies into science classrooms and vice versa, having arts projects that involve science in some way, I think is a really nice way for students to be able to start doing some of this stuff themselves. And I think that if, you know, when I was in high school science, if I was able to approach it from a more artistic viewpoint, it might have, you know, clicked better in my head. So I think that sort of introduction and cross-disciplinary work at that young stage helps people to understand it better when they become adults.
That's fantastic. All of you, the words that you've contributed today in the discussion you've generated, and just through this symposium itself is a way to communicate and extend that research and those ideas further. So I'd like to encourage everybody, if you haven't been to see the exhibition, to come along this afternoon as part of the live part of Field Trip. We'll be having a bit of a walk and talk through the exhibition, and some of the artists will be here to talk about the specifics of the work, and it's also on at the gallery until the 30th of October. So I'd really like to thank Donna and Emma and Alinta. Thank you so much for sharing today, and very much appreciate your thoughts. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Emma, Alinta and Donna. That was an incredible panel, super inspiring research, and, you know, such interesting conversations around those intersections of art science collaborations and all of the, I guess, ethics of this kind of practice as well. So really inspiring work. We are going to move on now to our final keynote of our online live stream. And we're very privileged to be joined by Dr. Sarah Jane Pell. Sarah Jane is an artist, explorer, performer, and science art producer. She's really one of Australia's leading artists working at the intersection of art, science, and technology, and has been pioneering this field for many years. And she's currently an associate professor at Monash Human-Centered Computing Centre, and is the chief investigator of a ARC discovery project funded by the Australian Research Council. So she basically researches extreme performance as a creative practice that's dependent on participating in high-risk operational fieldwork in extreme environments to really design the aquatic body, which is a notion that she's really pioneered. And she was a former artist in residence at the Monash Immersive Visualization Platform, and her team worked on creating experimental content for the Cave 2 technologies for live performance. And we're lucky to have a Cave 2 here on campus at USC as well, which we hope to have Sarah Jane visit in the not too distant future. So she's really a pioneer of art science collaboration. So it's a beautiful trajectory from the panel that we've just had. And she's also recognised as an Australia Council Fellow, an arts leader, a TED Fellow, and a gifted citizen. Welcome to Field Trip, Sarah Jane.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I do hope that we get the chance to explore the Cave 2 at SCU very soon. That would be wonderful. I will kick off and firstly pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I was born and work usually, the Wurundjeri people of the Great Kulin Nation in Melbourne, Australia. I'm currently, however, and I'm very grateful for the welcome, to be in Brisbane, escaping lockdowns, and pay my respects to those who are welcoming me here during this transitional time. As Leah said, I'm kind of working at the intersection of art, science, and technology, but very much with an arts research practice basis. Let me share my presentation with you. Given the notion of Field Trip and its dedication this year to life underwater, I thought I would share with you this notion of a life underwater. A lot of the work that is conducted at sea, on sea, undersea, is of course looking at the natural world and the natural wonders. I'm really interested in those humans who make it their point in their business to explore these spaces, to be in-water custodians for a life form below, and what that might mean in terms of understanding extreme performance from the smallest component right through to the enormous components that are far beyond our imaginings. So for me, the notion of art and science began as two separate entities. One was a field of possibility based in imagination, in aesthetics, in the sublime. The other was a toolkit, a process, a methodology, a way of moving through the experimental process to test an idea, to rigorously defend a data set, or in fact to discover it. So I love these quotes that art is science made clear, or art is made to disturb while science reassures. Now that might be the case at the outset, as it was certainly with my original work in aquabatics, that art in fact was disturbing and the science was reassuring, the science of hyperbaric technologies and the living systems and sciences supporting the human body to live and breathe and survive in these extreme spaces. But as time goes on, I think increasingly we are finding that it is science that is disturbing and art that is reassuring, those human elements that help us make sense of the world as we are finding ever competing and extraordinary results through science. So there's a spiral between that I would like to explore, which I think of as a syzygy, much like an astronomical term, where there is a relationship between the water and the planet, as if a yolk and an egg, that there is this process of connection that we need to start to factor into the work. So while I guess a 20th century mindset was that science disembodies and art embodies, and I do embrace that. I think the two equally come together, that we have these opportunities for melding. If we are driven by curiosity, if we are led by questioning, that it is no longer important to tread clearly defined steps and field methodologies, that we can in fact start to hack those processes. We can transfer and connect. We can start to process, patch methodologies in order to get a greater holistic and systems understanding of the nature of anything that we are investigating, that we are researching, and that we are presenting in order to better understand. So I turned my practice from, I guess, performing aquanautics to performing astronautics, trying to understand the syzygy between the body underwater and the body in space. I began work with Project POSSUM, an acronym for Polar Suborbital Science in the Upper Mesosphere, working with science and engineering teams, effectively aeronomists, climate scientists who work in the upper atmosphere and the upper mesosphere to understand something of climate science change. So for me, the training with the technologies, the systems, the tools, the protocols for going into a suborbital flight and returning was one step forward, closer for me, connecting with a body of water in the sky, a body of water in the mesospheric cloud, the formations that are so unusual at the polar regions. So let me just show a little of the operational steps and the performative elements that I'm interweaving as a practice between extreme spaces. So taking these extreme opportunities for participating with crews and teams also places me in a situation where I not only need to undertake the operational elements and to undertake the science with these crews, that I also need to bring something else. In this particular photo, I'm not only undertaking bioastronautical research with the suit, with the vehicle, with the instrumentation, but I'm delivering a live TED talk while I'm doing it. It reminds me of a quote that I heard about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, that they're both dancing. However, Ginger is doing it backwards in high heels, making it look effortless. And there's something of that expectation of an artist working in these contexts, that it is the and. You do everything that everyone else does as a crew, and you contribute that other element. So it is not a problem, but an opportunity, something to grasp and to run with. I was very honored to work as the simulation astronaut for Project Moonwalk. This is a consortium-based project coming out of a European Commission 2020, Horizon 2020 project, where a number of groups, COMEX, NTU, ITN, Space Applications, Liquify Systems, the Airbus Group, and DFKI, all work together over a series of tests and trials where the astronaut to astronaut to robotic cooperation activities for a lunar surface mission were trialed, both in a pool, also in a neutral buoyancy facility, test facility at night to simulate being on the far side of the moon on a darkened crater. And also then transitioning the tools. So this is the Gandolfi 2 spacesuit, simulation suit there in a lunar lander. So undertaking the processes of egressing out of the lander, going and using robotic and geo tools, hand tools, geological tools like pentagrams and so on, but at the same time giving me an opportunity to imagine being on the moon and to bring some of my performance knowledge, my creative knowledge, to how they might engage in new processes and new understandings, so that when we went out into the ocean environment, an ocean that I'm very, very familiar with, that I was able to adapt and work through procedures and protocols. And also this is Yemo, the robot. My gesture controls were the system that enabled Yemo to perform with me. And we had this beautiful cooperative dance underwater. This is one of the highlights of a convergence of art and science practice for me, working with 8 different teams, 8 different communication systems and requirements, but at the same time, once mastering those, having the imaginative capacity there underwater in my beautiful, sublime space, feeling infinitely connected to the planet, but imaginatively going beyond and picturing what it might be like on a lunar mission. So let's just hear something.
We are comparing
of this mission.
The analog simulation site of Rio Tinto with the analog simulations in Marseille, and also with lab testings. So we are trying to find out what do we get out of doing analog simulations and comparing robot and astronaut procedures.
The subsea landscape near Marseille was selected to represent the lunar surface. Here, scenarios were conducted in an even more complex way. The suit port, the rover, and all of the equipment had to be installed underwater before the astronaut could enter the suit.
All the moonwalk elements, such as the procedures, the tools, the suit port, but also the gesture-controlled rover, can be part of future space activities, space missions on the moon and on Mars. And to advance Europe's capabilities, all these are important to prepare and train astronauts for these future missions.
In the future, we will be able to produce a new iteration of our human-machine interface, and we can come up with new concepts of operations that can make this work more effective. And of course, we would like that our hardware becomes flight ready, and that once Europe or anybody wants to go to Mars or to the moon, we will be able to have the hardware ready and useful for the tasks that are needed.
Project Moonwalk takes us one step further into the future of human space exploration, pairing humankind and technology to transcend known boundaries.
We are comparing.
So for me, these parallels between the artist, the scientist, and the astronaut are absolutely essential. And as I said, this convergence of ideas basically focused on discovery and mutual discovery and the communication of results and the shared passion for interpreting the unknown. So these are some of my heroes, some of the people that I reference. This is about art and science coming together. Sylvia Earle, she led the first all-female underwater habitat crew in the Tektite 2 Mission 6 group 50 years ago. We celebrated the 50th anniversary last year. Living and working underwater, Sylvia still to this day goes down to Aquarius Reef habitat, telling us of this ocean exploration. Here is us celebrating, bringing the original crew back for this 50th anniversary celebration and learning not only what has transpired, what occurred, what the mission was like, but what lessons still need to be learnt, what discoveries are still required, what approaches and understandings are still needed. So I take my work from an underwater performer and a commercial diver and somebody who has been engaged with subsea habitat projects, looking for ways of bringing a practice to these environments, to these highly regulated performance environments, and to be able to, I guess, dance between the languages, the glossary of terms between two different worlds while I'm there. I look to Catherine Sullivan, the first female to ever undertake what is called an EVA, a spacewalk, an extravehicular activity. She also returned to planet Earth and was not only up there at the International Space Station, but she returned to become the first woman to descend to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. She too has this innate curiosity and drive for discovery. And I'm intrigued by what it is that we can learn through her understanding of inhabiting the explorer's mindset as she goes into these places. Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman to go into space. She was effectively left in space in her own. During her mission, there was a lack of communications cut out, and they didn't know if she was going to be able to return. She persisted, she returned. She literally landed on planet Earth, coming from this whole different extraterrestrial experience as another woman, as another being. And I'm interested in her resourcefulness, her resilience, her insight, her composure as she went through all of these, but also the training, the procedures, and the additional hoops that she needed to go through as a woman in exploration to work with these crews and teams. This plays back not only as a woman working in a high-risk environment or a male-dominated workplace, but as an artist, as a female artist working in these spaces. I find the strategies and methodologies intriguing, and I can take those lessons into, say, a film. This is a film about we are all explorer fish. So arriving in a place, and this place happens to be Mars, exploring a new world alone, what that might mean. I'm interested in Scott Paraninsky. He was not only a NASA astronaut who went on a spacewalk himself, but he was the only astronaut to return and to summit Mount Everest. He too has this innate sense of looking at the extremes for new understanding, not only of the internal world, but of the natural environment. So again, I echoed this. I have taken this on board. I too attempted Mount Everest. I got caught in an earthquake and it didn't happen, but I did return, and I returned to Nepal, to the upper Mustang, to the higher Himalaya, to take with me motion capture systems, 3D 360-degree cameras, to try and understand something of these spaces and how they impact human performance and the body. Richard Garrett, he is the second-generation astronaut after his father, a spaceflight participant, a gamesman, a designer, an artist. He produced paintings in space, exhibitions in space, games in space, films in space, and so on. He too returned and went down to the Mariana Trench, following Catherine, to create wonder. His notion of space and spatiality is intriguing, and he returned to create space VR as a way, as he said, is the only way to share in these deep experiences of these extreme environments. So I too work in places where I'm placing the body into altered gravity environments, taking motion capture suits, in this case the Rococo suit, with me to capture from a scientific data about this emotion, but at the same time to try and describe the emotional performative space that can infuse in my work. So let's just quickly talk about inspirational space artists. I'll be very brief, but Alexei Levanov, the first cosmonaut to ever, or the first person to ever go outside of a spaceship on a spacewalk, he could document that in film and drawings. He drew his first, the sunrise over planet Earth from the vantage of space and his crewmates. Alan Bean taking items from the lunar surface, embedding those in his paintings about the experience, documenting it. Guy Liberté, the director of Cirque du Soleil, dedicating his live 2-hour performance as he spiraled the globe from the International Space Station to water awareness, One Drop Foundation leading this incredible event as he recounted the story of the Little Prince. Or Nicole Stott, she too understands that link between the water, the planet, and space. She's worked as an aquanaut at the Aquarius Reef Habitat and an astronaut at the International Space Station. I think she might have been on a shuttle mission as well, but she paints and draws the views of the ocean from below, beyond, and above, and using satellite imaging and watercolors and so on to create this cyclic investigation into aquatic perception, which I find beautiful. These are microgravity impacts the way that a spinning top works in space. So this person is not an artist. This is a takeonaut, an astronaut, who is putting an LED on a spinning top and then increasingly understanding that the experiment has this beautiful aesthetic and that he is able to dance and choreograph and capture and compose beautiful light works that could only occur in a microgravity environment like this at the space station. And there's a rapper, Waco, I think, I apologize if I've got his name incorrect, but a rapper who built his own little spaceship, a vehicle with a higher altitude balloon to literally return in about 13 minutes back to planet Earth after being in space to inform his next album. And you can imagine I'm very inspired. I would love to do that. So we think about all of these documented reasons about the importance of cosmonautic art, illustration, illumination, expression, record, representation, dedication, and application. These are all vital elements and things that arts can contribute to science. But then there are the artist researchers, the artist inventors, the artists who are themselves conducting the experiments, that they are themselves producing the science. So let's talk about those artists, those who inspire me. Susan Austin, a British artist who works looking at incredible performance both of sea and in flight, using her augmented body through the wheelchair and an adaptation of her performance and mobility capabilities to access these spaces and hopefully prepare for human spaceflight. Angelo Vermilion, he works as a biologist and an artist, integrating biological approaches to systems thinking for a future starship. He was also the first artist to command a NASA space simulation. Agnes Meyer-Brandes, she came from a background in the sciences as well, geoscientist, I believe. She is commanding a crew of geese, as moon geese, and training them for space in this beautiful, poetic Earth-based simulation, which I think is gorgeous. Bradley Pitts, an American artist, he trained as an aerospace engineer, became a contemporary artist, and he is interested in the body in space without a utility, just simply the subjective experience of floating and falling here in a parabolic flight where his eyes are shut, his ears are closed off, and he can feel that motion, understand falling. So falling and floating, Thomas Serrasano, creating an opportunity for audiences to engage in those altered gravity, those buoyant feelings, that sensation of being in the air. Or here's a range of people: Morag Whiteman, Kitsu Dubois, the performers, aquanauts, the genie, the people riding magic carpets in zero gravity flights, talking about how we might use a parabola. Or in this case, aerogel. This is Ioannis Michailodis using aerogel to speak about this heavenly quality that we imagine in space. So all of these things are very inspiring to me. So we can build upon what Roger Melliner has talked about, defining space art. We can look about this. This is something, a description that was maybe 10, 15 years old now. And we can add to that biotechnologies, the living art, and also the new realities that we have as a capability. So I will go into some of my own practice and how I'm starting to bring them all together, developing, just like the Apollo astronauts needed to develop simultaneously the transmission and media capabilities for their discovery, I'm trying to do the same. What do I build as an artist so that I can take into the aquatic and the space environment some means of capturing, transmitting, transmuting, and connecting these signs of life? In this case, I was working with Cinema Swarm, a cinematic interactive technology and a motion capture system to create an avatar of my experiences underwater with Project Moonwalk, being able to give a keynote performance to an audience and sharing some of that discovery. So this is a different method. It slows down, but it's a way of articulating some of the performance insights that you can gain. So I can translate the experience of being in a pool, for example, or then transiting over into the ocean, mixing in the avatar with the real footage and providing this, I guess, an internal monologue of what is occurring and the imaginative process of going into the lunar environment. I also worked with a Spectra mission where I was looking at the human performance, say, in a darkened crater. This is in Poland, where we were undertaking all sorts of field scenarios, and we were sending a LiDAR data capture of the entire space back to the Monash Immersive Visualization Platform, where they could see that our vice commander had in fact disappeared, and we were here, they were helping us to locate it. We had a choreographer from New York, Richard Move, working with us, interacting with us, being able to explore and discover the site that we had created, that we had inhabited. And he could send back his data to me in the airlock, and I could follow his hands and his head gestures and learn the dance that he was undertaking in the lunar crater data. With this, we were using the cave in a very different way. With his instructions, with his choreography, I could then go back into the lunar crater and undertake that performance that he had taught me. That I could learn those gestures, and in a site situation, in this immersive site, that I could then undertake. If we can do that with a performance, we can do that with a utility to support astronauts in the future. And something of this culminated in Stellar Corpus, where I tried to capture some of the seven muses, the bodies, the levity, the gravity that I have felt in these spaces, both underwater and in flight in microgravity environments. To speak of this aquatic body, this body of water, this body of light, this body infinitely connected to our planetary context, but also our universal context. So in a motion capture suit there, one of those figures is live, a live performance, and the others are pre-recorded. So I talk about a simultaneity and achieving that. How can I be underwater and out of space at the same time? And I ask that question both figuratively and literally, because I think what is needed for life underwater is the conceptualization that all life includes not only our biome, but our environment. And for that, for us to move forward and to be greater custodians of life underwater, we need to understand that we are simultaneously part of a microcosm and a macrocosm at once.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was incredible. Such inspiring work you're doing. And that's really taken us from local to global, you know, looking at the potential of art science collaborations underwater and this idea of that life below water theme, which we were really exploring this year, and in space as well, taking us from underwater to space. Absolutely fascinating work and really, you know, inspiring to hear about all those practitioners, artists, scientists, explorers that have really inspired your practice as well. So many incredible connections between water and space, art and science, and beyond, and, you know, really see how it connects to your own practice as well, and you know, connects to this theme of life underwater. Really inspiring work. So, you know, Field Trip, you know, really is about bringing all of these new ideas together and exploring how vital creativity is in responding to the climate crisis and reimagining our future. We've seen and heard so much of that today with incredible artists and scientists talking about practice that's really at the forefront of this research, you know, talking about the ethics of art science collaborations, the ethics of the kind of practice that we're engaged in, the importance of listening and asking for permission, and what's really at the heart of these art science collaborations. I think what's particularly inspiring is, you know, so much of this work has been positive and hopeful and really looking towards reimagining the future. And it's been a truly incredible morning. Thank you so much to all of our presenters, our keynotes, our panelists, and those that were chairing panels as well. Thanks again to Lyndon Davis for welcoming us to country this morning. And this officially brings us to the end of our online program. Thank you to everyone that's joined us on live online this morning. We've had over 200 delegates joining us online from all different parts of the world. And I thought, just to finish, I would just very quickly share the online platform as well, just to show you these locations that all of our delegates are coming from. So if I flip this down, we can see all of our delegates here, over 200 people. And if we click on the Artsfront map, we're able to see the locations that everyone's streaming in from. So while this brings us to the end of our program, I would definitely encourage you to connect with delegates, connect with the presenters and the panelists, see all of these amazing people that have joined us online, and continue the conversations that we've been having as part of Field Trip today. It's been such a privilege to share all of this work with you, and we are now going to shift into the kind of second half of Field Trip. But I would just like to say thank you again to all of our incredible presenters. And thank you to ArtsFront for hosting our live stream this morning and hosting the Field Trip digital platform. And thanks, of course, to our presenting partners, Horizon Festival here on the Sunshine Coast, and at the Australian Network for Art and Technology, and USC. And so we're going to move into our in-person program now. We'll be, for those of you on the Sunshine Coast joining us, we're going to be meeting at the Maroochy Botanic Gardens at 2 p.m, which is about 45 minutes. And then we'll be shifting to USC for exhibitions and performances. So we will look forward to seeing some of you in person soon. And for all of our online delegates, please continue the conversation online. Thank you again for joining us, and we will look forward to seeing you at the next field trip. Thank you.